Hello, my name is Jonathan Bush, and I have the great pleasure of serving as the chairman of the board of FREOPP. I will be your MC today, relentlessly pounding into you the locations of the restrooms and the timing of the cocktail hour. But first, my moment in the sun, my intro. What a time to be in these United States. The bosses did not have an easy choice to make, but 150 million strong, they made it and made it clearly. Anytime hundreds of millions of blessedly different people force themselves to choose among two choices, only two, there will be a lot of baby lying in the sluice with the bathwater. There is so much information, so much signal, and so much noise. Mario Cuomo said, maybe he borrowed it from JFK, I'm not sure, you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose. Whether or not you like its medium or its meter, we have elected a master poet. He fished for and found and squeezed, 2 or 3 veins that brought the most blood to the surface across an impressive array of American demographics. Many of us don't like his style, but don't blame the populist for chasing his popularity wherever it leads. We laid the game, he played it. Instead, we should be ready to help and to add dimensionality and thoughtfulness and constraint and detail to the prose that follows the poetry of the campaign trail. This is the work of FREOPP. We are doing it all the time, no matter who wins. We are a consortium of intellect and hard work across a range of critical sectors of American society that, through generations of the best intentions, have become extremely complex and sometimes toxically so. We have found countless situations where our careful work has led to the reinsertion of free market and free agency in places where it had well-meaningly been choked out, and where that reinsertion has disproportionately served the interests of the lower 50% of American incomes. Our work is careful and thoroughgoing and brave and sometimes boring. That happens when you are careful, but thus more digestible by more people. It makes for 60-vote majorities in the bills we help build in the Senate. Not 51 and a litany of vows to overturn at the next change of the tide. Over the next day and a half, we will experience a tasting menu, an intellectual tapas, if you will, of that work, and we will move that work forward by our engagement in it. Hopefully also, we will be moved a little. Maybe we'll think a little differently, add a few facts that were missing from our logic trees, and fork over some cash, because this work ain't cheap. Speaking of not cheap, we are sitting here together thanks to the serious, not cheapness, of some pretty marvelous organizations. Arnold Ventures is one. Thank you guys very much for sponsoring us here today. If you are a FREOPP person like me and you learn that there is a great and powerful organization whose sole purpose, and this is from the website, is to understand the root causes of broken systems that limit opportunity and create injustice, you cannot help but wipe a tear from your eye when they find you and you find them and they begin to support you. Same thing with the John William Pope Foundation. From his website, advancing the ideas of limited government, individual freedom and personal responsibility, and strong communities, as you think about our existential woes as a society, as we isolate and fractile into our sub-clicky communities. What a wonderful vision that is, and to have it supporting FREOPP is more wonderful still. There are others, the Clapham Group, the State Policy Network, Students for Liberty, Taxpayer Protection Alliance Foundation, and Young Americans for Liberty. Please, let's give it up for all of our sponsors here today. And of course, give it up for yourselves who will be digging even deeper into your own pockets. Thank you very much in advance for your support of FREOPP. We need you very much. FREOPP is my largest check every year, and it is always my greatest joy in giving. It feels truly inspirational to bear witness to the work of the FREOPP scholars, and in particular, the work of Avik Roy. Avik started FREOPP with a few fellow travelers and has been building it and leading it and doing all of the work for it and the research in it and the recruiting for it and the fundraising for it in a way that makes us all a little dizzy and all a little proud. He has our opening remarks today, and he has been the framer of everything that we have done, and we are very grateful for him. Please welcome Avik Roy.
Welcome to Freedom in Progress 2024, and welcome to those of you watching us on C-SPAN. I've never been more excited to greet you to FREOPP's flagship annual gathering. I know that sounds like a standard CEO throwaway line, but I really mean it. Let me explain why. When Jonathan Bush and Lan Hee Chen and Ames Brown and Mike Miltenberger and a bunch of others and I came together in 2016 to create this new think tank, the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, the Liberty Movement was in serious trouble. Having won the Cold War with our principles, and having heard Bill Clinton in 1996 proclaim during an economic boom and a balanced budget that the era of big government was over, we got overconfident and started to ignore aspects of the American economy that were leaving more and tens of millions of Americans behind. When ordinary Americans increasingly complained that they couldn't pay their health care bills, as a movement, our habit was to respond that it's not the government's job to help you afford your health care. As factory workers lost their jobs to Chinese competitors, we patted workers on the shoulders, assured them that the overall benefits of free trade outweighed the specific costs to them and their communities, and told them that there was nothing to do from a policymaking standpoint. As rising home prices put the American dream of home ownership further out of reach, our quote-unquote solution, 0% interest and low down payments, enriched Wall Street and existing homeowners, but only made prices for renters and first-time buyers go up even more. And as young people drowned in over $1 trillion of student debt, we had nothing at all to say other than that we didn't like political correctness. The American economy in 2016 was strong by conventional measures like GDP per capita and the S&P 500. But in truth, the 2016 economy was working well, especially for college-educated elites in the Silicon Valley corridor, the Acela corridor, and the healthcare industry. Much less so for people living paycheck to paycheck. When adjusted for inflation and rising healthcare premium contributions, co-pays, and deductibles, median household income in 2016 was $67,182, which was actually lower by $300 than it was in the year 2000. Donald Trump won in 2016 because he intuitively understood that something was wrong with the way the US economy was treating Americans without a college degree. In the years since, it has become fashionable to pronounce dead the so-called consensus around free enterprise that allegedly ran the country over the last 2 generations. But the problem wasn't that free enterprise had free reign and had run amok between 1980 and 2016. It was that capitalism had become corroded by an unimaginably complex web of cronyism, cash, and compliance. Subsidies juiced demand and regulations restricted supply. Federal rules protected and rewarded large incumbent oligopolies against innovative startups offering lower prices and higher quality. It was the federal government that drove healthcare inflation skyward by creating incentives in the tax code and the Medicare program for hospitals, doctors, and drug companies to raise their prices. It was the federal government that stood by while China violated free trade agreements and that did too little to reform the laws and regulations that were making too many American products less competitive around the world. It wasn't free markets that led housing prices to rise. It was zoning and permitting restrictions enacted by local governments and the Federal Reserve, which by imposing caps on borrowing costs, massively subsidized home ownership for the wealthy and for financial entities. It wasn't free markets that led colleges and universities to raise their prices by 7% a year for decade after decade. It was the federal government whose subsidies of student loans enabled universities to treat taxpayers like ATMs, because even if students defaulted on their debt after graduating, the universities still got paid in full. The reason you're here is because what 2016 taught us is that it's not enough to simply believe in free enterprise. We have to prioritize the use of free enterprise to solve the biggest problems faced by lower and middle income Americans. It's not enough for us to wave our hands about what the proper role of government is, or to drone on, as some of us are inclined to do, about the congressional powers enumerated in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. It's not enough to simply oppose the price controls and regulations and subsidies proposed by others, as if the rising cost of healthcare and housing and higher education is the inevitable and just result of the free market just doing its thing. We have to generate politically viable, economically workable policies that can get 60 votes in the US Senate that enable Americans to keep more of what they earn. And this is why I'm more excited about this year's Freedom and Progress Conference than I've been about any other. You and I know that economic freedom has done more than any other idea in the history of humanity to lift people out of poverty and into prosperity. We call this conference Freedom and Progress in honor of one of the greatest Americans of all time, Frederick Douglass. In 1870, newly freed slaves had asked the abolitionist Douglass whether they ought to remain totally loyal to the party of Lincoln or whether they should let Democrats and Republicans compete for their votes. Douglass replied that blacks had fought for the freedom to vote their conscience, regardless of party, and added, "I never intend to belong to any other party than the party of freedom and progress." It's a reminder to all of us that while a lot of different things get called progressive in America, it's freedom that has been the engine of true progress time and time again. Freedom is what has made America the greatest and most prosperous country in the world, the place where so many people of humble origins have achieved amazing things and transformed our lives. People have offered lots of explanations for why Donald Trump defeated Kamala Harris earlier this month. But according to exit polls, one factor reigned supreme: the cost of living. Among Americans who felt that their family's finances were better or similar today than they were 4 years ago, Kamala Harris won 3-1. But among those who felt their finances were worse, Trump won by more than 4-1. Regardless of who you were rooting for, the most encouraging thing about the election results is that, as Patrick Ruffini has documented in his terrific book, Party of the People, Americans are voting based on economic concerns now more than ever. That goes against the dominant political theory of both the left and the right since the 1990s, which has been that future elections will be determined primarily by demographics, with white people voting for Republicans and non-whites voting for Democrats. In 2024, a majority of voters told us that they don't want to be divided anymore by race and ethnicity. They want to be treated like adults and united by an economy that serves all Americans. They want to know that if they work hard and play by the rules, they can afford to put food on the table and roofs over their heads and set their kids up for bigger and better things. In other words, this is our time. The president-elect and the new Congress were elected with a mandate to reduce Americans' cost of living. A handful of people are trying to advise them that economic freedom is passé, that only zombies in wax museums still think that people should be able to choose how they work and how they live. But economic freedom remains the only sustainable way to expand opportunity and bring down the cost of living for all Americans. It's the people in this room, the panels at this conference, and our allies around the country who are developing the most compelling solutions to the problems Americans care most about. Today and tomorrow at Freedom and Progress, you'll be inspired by an incredible array of thinkers, writers, scholars, and activists. We have panels on reducing the cost of healthcare, housing, and education, along with a panel on neglected aspects of inflation. We have some of the best scholars in the country reimagining the way we address homelessness and welfare policy. We have leaders on the role of public policy and artificial intelligence, the future of work, and the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, an idea first proposed by FREOPP in 2021. We have a panel on the role that states and localities can play in expanding opportunity, and one on how the rising federal debt is affecting ordinary Americans. I want to especially highlight some of the most timely sessions that we'll have at Freedom and Progress this year. We have a great breakout session on how to fix legal immigration, an essential engine of our economy. We'll have a debate on the merits of free trade and industrial policy with Mark DePlacido of the American Compass and Dominic Pino of the National Review Institute. Arguably the biggest policy question the next Congress will have to face is how to deal with the expiry of key provisions of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Later today, we have an all-star panel with some of the nation's biggest players on tax policy, including Ryan Ellis, Grover Norquist of Americans for Tax Reform, and Daniel Bunn of the Tax Foundation. One of the most interesting ventures proposed by the president-elect is the Department of Government Efficiency, led by Elon Musk and FREOPP board member Vivek Ramaswamy. Our chairman, Jonathan Bush, is going to lead a conversation with two of the smartest people who've been thinking for years about this topic, Obama administration alum Jennifer Palka, whose book, Recoding America, How Government is Failing in the Digital Age and How We Can Do Better, is the best you'll read on why bureaucracies are failing to serve the people they're meant to help. She'll be joined by Philip Howard, who is the brains behind President Trump's effort to make policymakers in the executive branch more accountable to elected officials. On the same topic, you won't want to miss FREOPP scholars Dan Lips and Aparna Mathur with Linda Miller talking about how digital ID technology pioneered in Estonia can eliminate identity theft, increase access, protect privacy, and reduce fraud in welfare programs. At lunch, it'll be my honor to award this year's Frederick Douglass Prize for Exceptional Leadership in Expanding Freedom and Progress to former Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar, whose Operation Warp Speed developed the COVID vaccines that saved hundreds of thousands of American lives and helped to reopen our schools and our economy. It was an amazing and far from inevitable example of how government and the innovative private sector can work together. We'll glean insights from the Secretary about what we can learn from that experience and what it takes to be a successful HHS Secretary. The end of one presidential election isn't just a time to talk about the transition of power. It's traditionally the beginning of the debate about the next presidential election. And tomorrow, we'll close the conference by talking about the politics of freedom and progress in 2028 with FREOPP board member and Stanford Domestic Policy Director Lan-Hee Chen, National Review editor Ramesh Ponnuru, and Competitive Enterprise Institute CEO Kent Lastman. After my opening remarks this morning, I'll sit down with Patrick Ruffini, who I mentioned earlier, in 2023, published the most insightful book about the 2024 election and our emerging multiracial politics. We were supposed to also be joined by Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist George Will, but he had an unexpected urgent family matter that came up over the weekend, and he's stuck in New York this morning, so he sends his sincerest regrets. We also lost Ben Domenech to a sick child, but we're hoping to see him tomorrow. You can find the entire Freedom and Progress program by downloading the SCHED app, S-C-H-E-D, and searching for Freedom and Progress 2024. I want to join Jonathan in thanking our generous donors and sponsors here in the room and around the country. I also want to thank the whole FREOPP team, especially FREOPP's Vice President Rebecca Atwood, who went above the call of duty, working days, nights, and weekends to make this conference a success, and also our chairman, Jonathan Bush, whose strategic brilliance and joyful leadership has been such a big part of FREOPP's growth. I have 3 asks for you for today and tomorrow. First, I hope you'll take advantage of the conference to introduce yourself to at least 3 people you don't already know. That's how we strengthen the community of people who are using freedom to achieve progress. Second, I hope you'll take note of the most interesting reforms you learned about at Freedom and Progress and share them with the elected officials and policymakers that you know. That's how we increase the impact of our values and expand their constituency. Third, if you find this conference as inspiring as I do, that you'll share that with new people who can attend next year so more people can become a part of this movement. In recent weeks, the blogger Matt Iglesias put out what he calls the 9-point Common Sense Democrat Manifesto, a call for his fellow Democrats to develop an agenda that addresses voters' core concerns. FREOPP scholars have been hard at work at our own pro-freedom version of this, which we call Agenda 2025. We've begun to launch that project, and over the next several weeks and months, we'll be rolling out the full body of work, incorporating the wisdom of this group and the takeaways from this conference. It's been an amazing journey building FREOPP out over the last 8 years, from a post office box to what you see today. Policy changes proposed by FREOPP scholars have impacted the lives of over 150 million Americans, a remarkable record for such a young think tank. Every scholar at FREOPP is required to focus how individual liberty, free enterprise, technological innovation, and pluralism can improve the lives of Americans on the bottom half of the ladder. It's how we stay true to our mission of expanding opportunity and how we're able to bring Democrats and Republicans together to embrace pro-liberty reforms that can unlock the potential of every American. I've never felt stronger about the value and relevance of that mission, and I'm so grateful to all of you for the work you do to advance it. Thank you.